Hello, everyone. Welcome to Light of the World. I'm Andre Sliven.
I'm John Keller.
And today we have with us Father Deacon Paul Siewers, who is a professor of English literature at Bucknell University. And before we start our topic today, Father, could you lead us in prayer?
Sure. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. O heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of truth, thou who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasury of good things and giver of life, come and dwell with us and cleanse us from every stain, and save our souls, O good one.
Amen.
Amen. Father, I want to admit that prior to the past few days, I have never heard of you. Unfortunately, I'm not a very cultured person, I guess.
No, you're blessed.
Brutally honest.
Brutally honest. But I suspect that there might be a few people out there that are in the same position as I am. And I've only heard good things about you. So I'd like to know, Father, who are you? What do you do? I heard that you teach at Bucknell University. What is life like there as an Orthodox cleric? Just say anything you want.
Sure.
Tell us your story.
Well, thanks for letting me be here today. This is great. It's a blessing to be here at the seminary, Jordanville. So I'm an associate professor of English literature at Bucknell, which is in central Pennsylvania. It's a liberal arts university, although we have an engineering and a management school. I used to be a newspaper reporter. I was urban affairs writer for the Chicago Sun-Times for a while before I became an academic. And I have co-edited I guess 2 books, maybe 3 books for Orthodox Seminary Presses, one of them for the Holy Trinity publications here. And they're on topics about Orthodox Christianity and current issues. So mainly about marriage and sexual morality and controversies over those issues in the modern world. But that also relates to challenges of being an Orthodox Christian in academia, and I imagine challenges for students at academic institutions. So you probably have listeners who are at universities or even public high schools or private high schools for that matter, and struggle with a lot of secular issues today that make it difficult to be a Christian sometimes, and let alone an Orthodox Christian. We maybe have a little bit of an advantage because people don't always understand what Orthodox Christianity is, but that's also, it's a blessing and a curse, right? Because we get lumped in with everybody's stereotype of Christians, and more recently, stereotypes about Russian Orthodoxy related to people's stereotypes about what's going on in the Ukraine and so forth. But I had some colleagues not too long ago on social media, 3 professors where I teach, kind of calling me out as the local Rasputin, which maybe would have been kind of funny, except it was in a malicious discussion, right? And I think that trying to stand up for free speech and freedom of religion in academic contexts is challenging. Orthodox Christianity emerged, of course, in a realm, in a part of the world where there wasn't freedom of speech and freedom of religion in the same way that Americans and Western people understand that. That sense of rights often they're related to individualism, which is a little different from the Orthodox ethos. But I think there's enough in American historical, traditional culture, if you will, for Orthodox Christians in academia to stand on some of those rights like free speech, freedom of religion, right? And even in the modern diversity ideology era, we are the diversity, so to speak. We help to bring diversity in religious matters, right? And so we should be recognized for bringing cultural diversity as Orthodox Christians, right? So I often make that argument on campus. Yeah.
I heard that you teach in your RASA, right?
I do, and I'm around campus in my RASA. That was shocking at first to some colleagues.
People would start staring.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I think the religious literacy rate among our students is fairly low. That's not meant to be insulting, but it's just like we're a secular university, and compared to 20 years ago when I started teaching, it's even lower. And so I think some students may think I'm like out of a Harry Potter book or something something like that, and not really make the connection. Some of them will think I'm Catholic or something. But I know when I first started wearing the riasa, I got some comments from administrators and people who were not happy, more the folks running the university. They would just sort of make little comments that indicated that they thought that I had sort of violated, and it was kind of like after the French Revolution when everything was secularized, somehow I was violating that code by wearing the riasa. Although I use the example, if there were people from other religious traditions or sexual ideologies or whatever who were wearing different kinds of clothes, that would be acceptable on campus, right? So why not have an Orthodox Christian walking around in a riasa, right? So
it shuts them up pretty quick.
Yeah.
It's like a little loophole.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's one strategy that sometimes works. Like, okay, we have a different cultural perspective. Often, in my mind, on campus, among the faculty who tend to be worse than the students on these issues, among the faculty, they try to make everything political. So it's like, oh, you're not in favor of same-sex marriage. And then, I'll say, well, that's because I'm in a religious tradition that believes in the traditional definition of marriage is between a man and a woman, right? And that's my cultural perspective. And they'll kind of respond, no, that's political, you're being right-wing. And, in other words, purposely or not, they tend to sort of whitewash the religious elements, right? And they kind of see everything in terms of secular politics. That's often the kind of response, like, oh, we're not anti-religious. We're just, this is just politics. We're just speaking out here. So it's okay to call you homophobe or transphobe or even racist, I think, because some of the racial ideologies prevalent today in academia don't exactly line up with Christian thinking about human anthropology and justice and so forth. So that's a whole complicated topic. But I think there are some things that, particularly in Russian philosophy, you can kind of understand some of the conversations about, for example, systemic racism in the West. I can, at least. Okay, I can see systemic secularism in the West, and so I can kind of get some of the systemic racism conversation. But when race, like sex, is made into a category and it involves assertion of rights and conflict between groups and so forth, then I think it departs from my sense of Christian anthropology and Christian ideas of justice. So it's not. Orthodox Christianity is not in any way in favor of racism, but we're also not just sort of into secular ideologies of race and sex. That's not our culture as far as I'm concerned. So by that I mean that, for example, the idea of a sort of mystical conglomerate of voices of color that you hear about in critical race theory. People who are people of color as having a voice of people of color that's somehow common. That's okay. I can understand some of that discussion from historical American perspective, but it's not. It's sort of like arguing that people who are sexual minorities, however that's defined, are all sort of the same point of view or all the same thing, so it gets away from the basic teaching in Orthodoxy that every human being is made according to the image of God, right? And so we're not trying to objectify people as whatever their sexual orientation is or whatever their racial identification, racial history is. That's, I think we can be understanding of those historical contexts, but also that's not our basic anthropology as Orthodox Christians. So, and that makes it, those two areas of race and sex are really central to a lot of thinking in academia today. And also, I think this view, a very materialistic view of human beings that emphasizes self-will, self-assertion. And in Orthodoxy, it's said that we teach and try to practice unworthily self-emptying in Christ, not self-assertion, right? And so that right there is sort of just putting us in a different dimension from a lot of these ideologies. Yeah. So,
well, unlike Andrei, who didn't know who you were, I actually did know who you were because
sorry,
you know, you actually
you're blessed not to know who I am. Seriously.
And you, Father Paul, are in a position at a secular university, you know, with a full-time job.
Yeah.
What do you have to say to those people who have full-time jobs and are in society which is getting increasingly anti-Christian, anti-tradition, and they're facing such scenarios like a person coming up and, you know, saying my pronouns or, you know, zays them when you know for a fact that they are a biological woman. What do you have to say to those people in those positions where, you know, they need the job to basically raise money for the family, but then they're kind of faced in a position where it contradicts the Orthodox faith?
Yeah, that's really challenging. And I think, you know, you have to pray your way through that kind of situation. Hopefully people have a close relationship with their spiritual father and can talk with their spiritual father about it, or their parish priest, their bishop, you know, with those kinds of struggles. I would say that, again, in academia, in theory, if you have tenure as a faculty member and you have academic freedom and you're at a place that subscribes to this view that we want cultural diversity, right, you can sort of assert yourself, and that way it's contradictory to what I just said earlier, right? You know, we're not about self-assertion, but in this case, it's assertion in an apologetic way, in the technical sense of that term. Not that you're apologizing,
right?
You know, like I'm sorry, but it's apologetics in terms of reaching out to people and trying to explain and articulate what Orthodox Christianity is about in this current moment of academic life. So there's opportunity there, but if you're at a sort of for-profit business corporation, it's harder to know what to do, right? And even for professionals, you know, people who are going into education or medicine, psychology, whatever, a lot of the professional associations now want people, you know, for their certification licensing to subscribe to certain beliefs that might seem to be contrary. So I think as much as possible to try to take what earlier we were kind of joking about partly as the loophole approach to, you know, okay, this is my culture. You know, you say you have a diversity policy here at this corporation. You know, that's hard to do in practice because, you know, I do that at the university and it can cause friction and, you know, ill will just trying to do that, right? And it's harder even in a business. I think maybe more Orthodox Christians starting their own businesses, that's easy to say, but schools, businesses, you know, trying to create a sort of economy. You know, we're so small in numbers, that's hard to do, but maybe there's strategic alliances with other religious groups that also have a little bit of an overlap on these issues with us, you know, traditions. And Rod Dreher, the Orthodox journalist, wrote this book, The Benedict Option, right? And he argues for this, like we have to build up support networks for including employment, schooling, so forth. He claims that everybody misunderstands that book. You know, he said, I'm not saying we should become Amish and, you know, run for the hills, but it's like, it seems like most of the reviewers read that book and say, Rod Dreher, Orthodox Christian writer, saying everybody should become Amish and run for the hills, but that's not, it's more subtle than that, but it's sort of hard to figure out how to do it.
Live like barefoot hobbits.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Can I present you with a scenario?
Yeah, sure.
So a student comes up to you and says, Professor, I used to be, let's say, Catherine. Mm-hmm. Now I'm Kevin. Mm-hmm. And if you call me anything else, I'm going to be deeply, deeply hurt because my new identity has changed. I'm no longer the person you once knew. Please do not call me my old name anymore. What do you do in that situation?
Well, I think I haven't had exact situations like that, and I haven't encountered, I imagine I've probably encountered students who may have had some kind of transition prior, but not sort of in the middle of, knowing them or class or whatever. But I think I would honor their request. I think where I would draw the line would be if I was somehow being asked to celebrate a certain model of sexuality where it involves this kind of fluid pansexualism, which is really common in our secular society today, and which is not really in accord with Orthodox anthropology of sex, right? In terms of our cultural tradition, that's how I would put it. So I wouldn't, if I was asked to list personal pronouns or things, I've joked that I would say thee, thou, thy, from King James Bible English, I guess I'm, if particular students are identifying themselves a certain way, that doesn't get me too, I don't feel that necessarily conflicts with me being an Orthodox Christian,
So it wouldn't be a sin to sort of be like, okay, you know what, you could be whatever you want to be called, I'll call you that.
I think that sums it up for me. Now, I will say that this is getting slightly off track, but it's kind of within the realm of what we're talking about. That I have a friend who's a retired philosophy professor from another college who's an Orthodox Christian, and he has had many students convert to Orthodoxy over the years, and he always said that he wouldn't. What brought them into Orthodoxy was their discovery of the beauty of Orthodox Christianity, right? It's liturgical beauty, iconography, just the beauty of the theology and the lived experience of Orthodoxy. And once they grasped that, their view on a lot of other issues would change, right?
Naturally, without interference.
And so it wasn't a matter, he said, if I started out arguing issues about what I call pansexualism, but kind of secular sexual ideology in the West, and or abortion or things like that, they would get nowhere in his view, right? Because we just get into these big arguments. It's not that you want to avoid what the church's teachings or applications of the church's teachings are. Kind of okay, you need to make that clear to people as things move along, but that's not what really brings people, in his view, to Christ. And I know of someone who came into Orthodoxy, who worked at a university, who unrelated directly to me, but was in a situation that was very much into the current secular sexual ideology mode of things. And as she got more into Orthodoxy, that was just, there was just a sort of transforming experience converting to Orthodoxy. And that situation, she changed her life to be in accord with Orthodox teaching, but it was a sort of natural shift without a lot of sort of arguing, discussion, debate, about these issues, because what happened was she found Orthodoxy, she found Christ in the Orthodox Church, and then other things just fell into line. So I think one thing to remember about a lot of these ideologies that are active right now in higher ed is that, paradoxically, funnily enough, they are actually very Eurocentric and Western. In other words, a lot of the criticism that I hear about philosophy, literature, civilization, whatever, is, it's Eurocentric today, right? But the ideologies that are at play in the secular world today are very much out of the West. They come out of secular Western culture, from the last century or two, right? And Dostoevsky recognized this, right? A lot of Russian philosophy recognizes this, that they're things that are very Western in this secularism, which claims to be global or universal. So one way to deal with this stuff is to turn that around a little bit and say, hey, okay, you're voicing a Eurocentric Western view, secular view of these issues, but I'm an Orthodox Christian, and my tradition is non-Eurocentric because, the biblical tradition and the Christian church really didn't emerge in my mind in a particular Eurocentric situation, especially when you're an Orthodox Christian, So I think we should make strategically more use of those kinds of arguments. Whether or not that's going to help hugely, I'm not sure, but we're partly sort of buying time to reach souls for Christ here, right? And I think in the academic world, Orthodox Christians can engage in apologetics. There was an old faculty member at Jordanville years and years ago. I think it was Ivan Andreev. I.M. Andreev was the name that he wrote under. And he wrote this little book that was published in English a while back called Orthodox Apologetic Theology. And it's a really nice book. Nobody really talks too much about apologetic theology because sometimes you hear moral theology or dogmatic theology, which is really important. That's very central. But not so much apologetic theology, but it is a thing. It's how do we explain orthodoxy to people in this current culture, right? And I think one aspect of that is just developing some better ways of addressing some of these ideologies. So I'm going to put in a plug for a book I co-edited unworthily, but the other co-editors were better than I was, which is Healing Humanity, which is published by Holy Trinity Publications. And it's a collection of essays by different Orthodox Christians, some of them academics, but it's, to my mind, when we were putting together the book, is how do you develop an apologetic approach to some of these issues? So I think it's both available in Kindle and paperback. So shameless plug here, sorry, but I don't know if we can give out a coupon. I can talk to Reader Nicholas Chapman about that.
Yeah, a link in the description.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you something about your experience as a professor. How often, or if ever, have you had a student come up to you and express interest in the Orthodox faith?
I do sometimes, and more since I've been wearing the riasa, just because I sort of stand out, I think. So that happens, and we have there's one student that I'm talking with now who has an interest. It's happened in the past. I think that one problem with bringing people into Orthodoxy through the academy is the need to have Orthodox communities that are close by the campus and functioning that people will get to, So we have that at our little mission. But I know we want to do more in the way of outreach. We have a Bible study once a week at the college bookstore in the cafe there. And we've had some interest among students, and we actually have a couple university employees who've been coming who are not Orthodox. But it's difficult because for a couple reasons. One is students, their schedules are so jam-packed often. And two, it's kind of like religion is off the radar pretty much, right? So unless it seems like kind of exotic. I had a student, we were reading The Life of St. Anthony in class, and the student said, wow, I didn't think this sounded much like Christianity at all. It seemed more like Zen Buddhism. And he meant that in a positive way, right? So it's like Christ the Eternal Tao, that book from Father Seraphim Rose's writings, where it talks about Taoism and Christianity and some parallels. I mean, the idea behind that book was just like Greek philosophy was fulfilled in Christianity. You could take Taoist philosophy and see ways in which Christianity sort of filled it out or realized certain things about it. Father Seraphim Rose pointed out that Tao was a term for logos in translations of the Bible into Chinese. They use the symbol for Tao to translate logos, for Christ or the Word. So because one of the meanings of Tao is the way. So anyway, I'm just saying all that because, the more we can kind of figure out ways to not in any way be dishonest or change the faith at all. We never want to do that. But to be able to kind of speak in ways that people can get interested in.
Meet them at their level, so to speak.
Yeah. So if you're reading the life of St. Anthony for the first time and have no context for that, right, you see this meditative life of prayer. You see this extreme asceticism that's, some people might think is almost like martial arts or something like that, in a spiritual way. And to be able to talk to people about that, kind of like the old Death to the World zine, I think would try to do that sort of thing too. But yeah.
So you mentioned earlier, Father, that you think there should be like a more closer Orthodox community near universities. I know a good handful of universities having a OCF program, Orthodox Christian Fellowship. Does Bucknell have an OCF? Or
we have one on paper, but it's never been fully registered. I think we're listed on the OCF website, and I think OCFs can be great. I remember in grad school there was an active OCF at the University of Illinois, which was a very large school. Sometimes it takes a larger school, I think, to sustain an active OCF. Penn State, for example, has a history of having an active OCF. That's a very large school. 38,000 students or something. And they have a little building, I think, associated with the church there. And they even had like a little apartment building, I think, for a while that students would live in. So those are all good ideas, I think. The OCF, in some ways, this is not meant as a diss, but I'm kind of speaking from a ROCOR perspective more here, maybe at this point in my life, that the OCF meetings and structures of things can get a little bit divorced from parish life, I think, and that's maybe a necessity for people on campus, but at the same time, I think it's ideal if students can, if there's a nearby parish where you can get into the parish life as a student. And, my older son is going to a Serbian church in Hermitage, Pennsylvania. Shout out to St. George Serbian Church, which is a great community. And there's a family there that picks him up. And, he kind of feels part of the family that picks him up to take him to church and back. But then he also feels part of the parish family, even though most of the time he's only there on Sundays. I think he's been going to a few Lenten services during the week, though. So that's good. They also have Schlivovitz plum brandy shots at the coffee hour, so I shouldn't say that publicly. But
my last name it's Sleven, so I get called Schlivovitz all the time.
All right, did I pronounce that right? I kind of mangled it, probably, yeah. But so anyway. But so what I'm saying is that I think for like real Orthodox connections, it's so important to have a feeling of good connections with one's home parish, a parish near the college, I think, and also family life where Orthodoxy is important to the family. I don't want to, as far as parents go, I've just read a lot of studies that indicate or suggest, I think many of them have to do with Protestantism, but, the role of the father can be really important, in terms of whether a child sticks with religion, which may, oftentimes, like across the United States, talking about Protestantism again, there are sort of higher registers of religiousness among women than men, right? But I think in Orthodoxy, we have like a really strong role for men, and I think, the father figure is important. And if it's not the father figure at home or the biological family, my dad was a great guy in many ways, but he was not religious, really. He was kind of anti-religious, But I think I was blessed to find spiritual fathers when I became involved in Orthodoxy that were really important to me. So I think that's another key thing, because it's not to discount at all the figure of the mother, the importance of the mother. That's, super important. We know, all the way up to the Mother of God, for sure. But I think there's a problem with retaining young people in the Christian faith in secular Western culture, and it's related to the lack of a father connection. Maybe I'm overplaying that, but I think that's true. Yeah.
You're right. I remember feeling like I have a great relationship with my father, but he's not Orthodox. He's not Christian. He grew up in the Soviet Union, and he was never, I think, really introduced to the church. So as a result, I always felt this kind of not wall between us when it came to talking about church topics, because he was very kind. He never like oppressed me or ever told me that, hey, son, this is ridiculous. He just stuck to his own guns, and we never really talked about it. And I remember feeling like, like I was missing something. And coming here, all of a sudden, my grandfather, who I never knew, he got killed in Russia in a bad fight, basically. But I also, I came here, and all of a sudden I had 40, 50 fathers, grandfathers, all at once.
That's what it feels like. Father around here.
A whole bunch of long white beards and colorful personalities.
That's great. That's great. Yeah,
I just want people to know who are watching or listening right now that if you want to talk to a man with wisdom, go find your local Orthodox priest. Not saying that my father is not a wise man; he is, but I just really wish he was Orthodox, and
When I wandered into a Greek parish, the parish priest soon kind of realized where I was. This was in grad school. My life was a real spiritual mess. And he said, the church is the hospital for the soul, and the monastery is the emergency room. You need to go visit a monastery. So he sent me off. I ended up at one of Elder Ephraim's monasteries just as a visitor, but I visited there often. And so the spiritual father I had who really instructed me in Orthodoxy was a monk priest there, and that was very helpful. The parish priest was very helpful too. He was a great parish priest, but so I had kind of two spiritual fathers there coming into Orthodoxy, and that was real helpful.
I think you're absolutely right with your quote about like the hospital analogy. That I heard that too coming here. So this one lady told me, she said, just don't expect to find saints. She said, you're not going to come to some place and everyone's going to be walking around and floating on little clouds with white light coming behind them. People are struggling, and that's a misconception that come to a monastery and all of a sudden, did he just say that? Did he just make that joke? And everyone's losing their minds, and it's like, no. People here, they're just like you. They're just like you, but they're having.
That's right.
They have a struggle, and they're working on it, and that's what kind of separates them from the rest of the world.
I found literature to be a path for me towards Orthodoxy. It's a path where I could get lost academically or romantically, sentimentally. Romantically meaning, like romanticism,
right.
In literature. But it did kind of help me. And I know you interviewed Father Deacon Nicholas, who probably addressed some of these issues too. But in talking about apologetics, we can also think about apologetics in the culture. So when you're doing academics, like for example, when I was growing up, reading The Lord of the Rings was a big deal for me, as a kid.
Oh, careful. It got branded as right-wing propaganda recently from
shocking.
Yeah, I know.
Poor Tolkien, I wish he could be alive right now and just see the things that are going on.
I know. Well, he, as you know, his day job was as a medievalist, so he studied a lot of pre-schism cultures in the British Isles that he was fascinated with. So although he was a good Edwardian Catholic, at the same time, I think a lot of his sort of cultural formation was back pre-1054 with the Celtic and Anglo-Saxon Christians and the Norse Christians and so forth. So for Orthodox readers, I think there's resonance there. But also then when I was doing academic work, it was in early Irish, Welsh, Old English, Old Icelandic literatures. And I sort of started to put together in my mind, okay, wait a minute, this is actually Christian. This was written down in a Christian literary culture, these works, right? And whether it's Beowulf or Tales of the Elders of Ireland or, all these kinds of different stories. And then I got interested in, okay, what was the monastic culture like in Ireland, where a lot of these stories were written down in the monastic communities. And there was like a close connection to the desert fathers of the East, right, in terms of the formation of Irish Christian culture. So, and that echoed on into a lot of later British literature works, which where people were trying to they were interested in the older Celtic works, they were interested in Greek literature, Byzantine literature during the Reformation. And so these influences keep coming back. So one of the projects I have is looking at the history of the novel as Christian literature that reflects certain themes from Byzantine culture, which essentially is Orthodox Christian culture, right? And those themes include cosmic symbolism of marriage, what I call the overlay landscape, which is sort of a spiritual dimension to everyday life, and also virtue as something that is transfigurative. You know, one of the meanings of virtue in the old days is power or strength, right? So, but that power or strength, it kind of comes from what we would understand to be the divine energies ultimately, which is the power of virtue. And also how identity is really relational, ultimately relational to God, but also to others. The Russians have this term sobornost for spiritual unity, right, in Russian philosophy. And that's important. So all those themes, I think, are present in the history of the novel as it developed. A lot of that history being in English language literature, but, Russian literature like Dostoevsky. So I think you can do projects like that in academia where you're doing a little bit of archaeological work sometimes, but then trying to apply it to modern readers. But you're kind of looking at, okay, here are the histories and traditions, even in heterodox Christian traditions, in literature and culture, and just bringing that to the surface a little bit more. That a lot of literature is about virtue, but we don't really talk much about virtue these days. It's more, race, sex, maybe class, in the way literature is
Why do you think talks about virtue have escaped today's society? Is it because it induces guilt and shame?
Possibly, and I think because virtue often came to be sort of misunderstood in a legalistic way rather than the way that I just mentioned. Herman Engelhardt, who was an Orthodox academic who helped to develop the field of bioethics in America, he said once in his writings that natural law in Orthodoxy is the spark of divine love in the human heart. So that's different from the way natural law is understood in a lot of Protestantism and Catholicism, where it's much more sort of legalistic principle. What he is talking about is more along the lines of the uncreated energies flowing and transforming. So virtue really has this transformative aspect, and it comes from a word that's related to man, being a man, right? Father Theodore was mentioned at the clergy conference yesterday for saying that to be a man means to have self-control, right? It doesn't mean to be an alpha male necessarily, right?
It's not he who dominates others but himself.
Right. And this is one of the things I think that gets misunderstood. And when people are trashing Christian ideas of sex and what's called sexuality, it's like the goal of Orthodox Christianity, as I understand it unworthily, is not to be heterosexual, it's not to be homosexual, whatever. It's to have that sense of, in old school language, it could be called manliness of self-control. But women saints were referred to as manly when they were exercising, self-control as well.
And not a negative way either. It was a good connotation.
That's right, yeah. And so I think that Orthodoxy teaches us to not objectify ourselves or others, and that includes not just we're not identifying ourselves, or we shouldn't be, with our passions in any sense. Even Foucault, the whatever grandfather of queer theory, he said that like the whole idea of having an identity, a sexual identity based on your sexual orientation, is a pretty modern thing. That was a quote unquote scientific enlightenment thing,
like a category error, as they taught us in philosophy.
Yeah, that's right. As opposed to seeing that, seeing behavior and, other issues. So that, to circle around a long way, to sort of retake virtue as something that we can talk about in Orthodox terms, and make it known that, we have a different cultural understanding of virtue, right? We're not talking about it in the Eurocentric Enlightenment way, right? So anyway, but I think that God has this mystery that's unfolded in the Bible from an Orthodox standpoint of man and woman from the very beginning in Genesis, pretty much, right? And there are, St. Maximus the Confessor wrote that there are two sort of aspects of that. He called it the extreme of male and female in Genesis 1:26 being part of being according to the image of God, male and female. And then he talked about the mean, kind of like the, I don't know, not average exactly, but sort of, that the mean was, okay, male and female as, sort of as the separate sexes that God created, right? So I didn't put that well, but, he said he uses these terms extreme, not in a derogatory way, and mean, but he said that, like the Apostle Paul says, there is no male nor female in Christ, right? And in Genesis, there's kind of an indication at first that man is male and female, but then says God created them male and female, right? So he says that both those things are kind of in play, where we continue to worship Jesus Christ as a man. We continue to ask for the intercession of the Most Holy Theotokos as the Mother of God, as a woman. But at the same time, there's a kind of spiritual unity there also. So it doesn't eliminate the difference between the sexes, but it does mean that marriage becomes a symbol, again, for us, of Christ and his church in this very intimate relationship, right? And so there's something about, I think there's a quote on one of the Jordanville brochures, which I like a lot. It says, you can't know God as your father without knowing the church as your mother, right?
I think that's St. Cyprian.
Maybe that is, okay, yeah.
Look at you.
No, I read the brochure. I read the brochure.
Oh, okay.
Theologian.
No.
That's my source too. So. But so I mean that's a whole big topic in itself, and I'm just sort of touching on that. But I think we're not trying, just to get back to what I said earlier in a simpler way that's based on Father Theodore's good words. We're not trying to be like alpha males, but we're trying to be manly in the sense of having self-control, right? And doing that in the context where male and female are. This is a little bit of a sort of Taoist analogy, rightly or wrongly, right? That you have the yin yang and you have the idea of the complementary male and female, in the yin yang symbol. That doesn't mean that you're kind of erasing one or the other sex, but it means that, the two of them together symbolize a kind of spiritual unity, I think, or sobornost, that in Russian philosophy, that's a little bit of an elusive term, but it was a term that was originally used to translate the term Catholic in the Nicene Creed. So when we say one Catholic and Apostolic Church, there was a form of that Russian word that was used to translate Catholic as sobornost, and it comes from sobor, like conference or cathedral. I think they wrote
Sobor. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you're pronouncing it right here. So my wife is Russian, so I need to her. Usually she's correcting me, which is I need. So
can you speak Russian?
No, I've sadly tried a number of times, but
Чуть-чуть.
Yeah, well, maybe. Yeah, but,
Andrei can barely speak English.
Yeah. How about you all? I don't mean to turn the tables here, but do you all speak any Russian?
I was born there.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah,
just to get deported tomorrow. I'm legal.
I would wish that. Then I would become number one.
John, you've got to learn some Russian now, I think, right? So,
well, I mean, my mom's Russian. My dad's American.
Okay. Oh, that's great.
And
okay.
He can speak good Russian. He's underselling himself.
She tried, making me read from the Azbuka, which is like a children's Russian alphabet book, and I hate it. And now I regret it, of course.
But at any rate, sobornost has this meaning of, like, in the West, like a lot of terms in the West in Latin, not meaning to diss the whole Latin language, which I enjoyed studying when I was younger, but like Catholic has this spatial meaning, like universal space, right?
Yeah, universal.
But sobornost has this meaning of sort of solidarity,
gathering,
deep communion,
almost,
right? And I think that the whole male-female unity thing embodied in marriage, it sort of exemplifies that in a lot of ways, right?
Well, it's like in Genesis, the two should become one.
Yeah. people used to say, there's nowhere in the Christian Bible did Jesus say anything about marriage being between a man and a woman. Well, that's wrong, and he actually does talk about marriage between a man and a woman, because he refers back to Genesis, that marriage was instituted with the time of Adam and Eve, right?
And we have the marriage in Cana. I was actually there last summer, and I saw I stood in the room, the hall where the marriage happened. It was pretty nice.
You all should take this show on the road, get some field trip money, and
nice.
kind of go over to the Holy Land. You could go to I took my kids, we were on a longer trip. I'm probably the only Bucknell faculty member to go to the Ark replica in Kentucky, but we took the kids there. I don't know if you know about that, but they built a giant Ark, according to the dimensions.
That's right, the replica.
Because you have the measurements in Genesis.
It's pretty cool, I think my older son thought it was cool. My younger son was a little bit like, he's more science-minded. He was like, I don't know. I said, well, here, read Father Seraphim Rose's Genesis, Creation, and Early Man, so I gave him that to him. But anyway, so
it's an expensive book.
It is, especially now that it's been out of print so long. I bought it long ago, but
it's over $1,000 now.
They keep saying they're going to reprint that. Father
that's
Damascene,
what I heard. They keep saying they'll reprint it, but
Father Damascene Christian. You should have him on the show here. Can you do Zoom interviews on the show? Or?
Yeah, I'm kind of old, but I think I could figure it out.
Old, I don't know. I'm
getting gray hair.
It's like Mel Gibson with The Passion of the Christ 2.
John, are you the younger member of the group, or I don't know if there's?
Well, the funny thing is, Andres, what? You're older than me.
Oh, okay.
I'm 23. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm 22, but then I'm in my second year of the master's program. He's in the third year.
All right. Okay.
Well, that's because I got silly. I was in the same class as John, and I actually dropped out after my first year.
Oh, okay.
My first semester, actually. That was my plan, to going for one semester, and then I left. Big regret. Fun fact.
You wanted to go to Hollywood, and I came back.
All right. Well, anyway, this is editable. So I met my wife so I was already Orthodox. I was baptized in a Greek church. Speaking of names, preferences for people's names. Okay, I have several names in Orthodoxy. So my birth name is Alfred. Okay, but when I became Orthodox, I understood there was no Saint Alfred. But now there's a Rocor mission with Saint Alfred the Great as its name patron. So apparently,
Western saints' names are becoming very popular.
He was a local venerated saint, not widely in the West, but there's a lot of reason why you could venerate him as a saint, I think, he is. So that's
We could have had a Father Alfred on the show. Is that what I'm hearing?
I know. But then, so when I was baptized, then the Greek priest told me that, Metropolitan Iakovos is coming to town in a week or two. And he said, and I had requested a Celtic saint named Saint Kentigern or Saint Mungo. It's the same saint. Mungo, right, of Glasgow. Father Theodore knows all about this. That's his hometown. So anyway, but then the Greek priest said, but you'll come up for communion and he'll say, Mungo, who is this Mungo? I don't know any Saint Mungo, so he said, we'll have to give you another name and we'll give you Pavlos for the Apostle Paul, which of course is a blessing.
It's a solid
I was
name.
Baptized with those two names, Kentigern and Pavlos. So I've got three names, which helps when I have to keep ahead of the police a little bit. I can keep changing identities here. But,
when they finally come to get you, Father, you'll have a couple names at your disposal.
Right, all different IDs, and everything. But when my wife and I met, so I'd already been Orthodox for a short time, and we met at the cathedral in Chicago where she and her mom lived. It was the OCA Cathedral, which if you're familiar with Chicago churches, the old Russian cathedral is the OCA Cathedral, and the Rocor Cathedral is out near O'Hare, which is a beautiful cathedral too, but it's not in the old building. It's just kind of how things worked out when, from my standpoint, and Rocor, the OCA split off from Rocor, there are different versions of this, but
it's just like asking a Catholic that, the Orthodox split off from the West.
But some places they took the old buildings, the old temples with them, and that's Chicago's one. So it's a beautiful old temple, but we got married there. And, but when I remember going in to talk to the priest there, we both went in to get sort of, I don't know if it's officially pre-marriage counseling or what they call it, but we did it. We went in to talk to the priest, and he said, what's the most important thing in marriage? So I said, love. My wife said, respect. And he said, no, you're both wrong. And he was like, really, it was like, he said it loudly and sharply. No, you're both wrong. And I was like, whoa, I mean, what else can we say?
What was the answer then?
And he said, the answer is commitment. So that's what he said is the most important thing in marriage. And of course,
it makes sense. When times get tough, you want to make sure that you stick it through.
Part of that is commitment to Christ too in the marriage, I think, but it's also commitment to each other.
To Christ.
Why are you looking at me? That's just
I don't know.
It's okay. Anyway, but yeah, so that was interesting. I don't know how I got off on that topic, except that I tell my students that frequently. I mean, like once every semester when, do a class, I work it in somehow. They think it's strange, but a lot of younger people delay getting married today. That's part of our culture. And I got married when I was older, right? And it's not easier having a family when you're older. Let me put it that way.
But don't you need to build up a career and wait until you're 45 to have your first, child?
Right,
maybe 50.
When you can't actually have children, right? And so,
well, I heard this argument where I remember I was church cleaning once. This 2 years ago, and this Russian church clean here in the monastery.
Oh, church cleaning.
Yeah, he's a good person. He cleans the church.
Okay,
I actually go to church, so I just want to. I'm kidding. Anywho. I'm kidding. Andrei goes to church. Anywho,
in case any seminary administrators are watching.
Seminary drama, yeah.
And he starts telling me about this person that he was on the phone with, and this guy met this girl, and he fell in love with her. And so he started saying, like, what do you have to offer? Do you have a car? He's like, no. He's like, do you have a job? He's like, no. Do you have a house? No. And he's like, what are you going to do? Just sit down and just look at each other in marriage? And so his argument was like, kind of get yourself,
right,
some money, something financially stable, so that way when you do bring a woman or a husband, vice versa, obviously I'm not saying same-sex marriage here, to kind of support them. But then I heard the other argument where you go through life together while you're young, and you kind of go through school or college or a job and kind of just work it out together. And that's what people did in the past. By, like you just said, people are kind of pushing off marriage at a later age. Do you think that's probably just because they don't want that responsibility?
I think so. And
or is it kind of
people have lost
fear?
The kind of,
do you think is also a type of fear?
It's a combination, and people have lost the religious meaning of marriage. So it became more of a sort of Disney romance kind of thing without
or just a legally binding contract.
Yeah, exactly. So Orthodoxy, is a much deeper sense of marriage as a mystery. And here again, if we can use terms that are currently used in an apologetics context, okay, gender expression, okay? I've been told, in effect, this is my perspective, but I think it's true, that I can't talk about Orthodox traditions of marriage, anywhere, I guess, because it's, whatever, hateful, whatever,
It's like racist.
But this is always, but my response
I don't know.
My response has been, don't cancel my gender expression, so gender expression is a big term these days. How do we express, Orthodox gender expression? Well, sometimes we have to teach and talk about it, right? Offer some apologetics about it. That should be out there, as much as anything else, right? We should be able to engage in Orthodox gender expression. So that's my strategic tip rhetorically in the day here. So
fearsome opponent, very fearsome opponents. I would not want to be on the other side of you.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm not quite sure that I've really accomplished anything, but God willing, we'll continue to figure out ways and pray for good strategy. It's not only strategy. I mean, it's what we're doing in our lives. So whether we go the marriage route or the monastic route or, the calling that you all are following in seminary, that's the most important stuff. We kind of expose people, as I said earlier, to the beauty of Orthodox Christianity and the Orthodox faith. That's the most important thing. I think these other things, it's a little bit like buying time. It's a little bit like Ivan Ilyan's book, Resisting Evil by Force. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Where, he makes the case for militancy and basically comes out of the Russian Civil War and resisting Bolshevism, right? And he's arguing against Tolstoy's pacifism. Of course, course, Tolstoy went off the rails.
Yeah, he became a born-again peasant, I think.
Yeah, right. That's a good description. But
it's Bishop Luke's favorite term that he likes to use when describing Tolstoy. Yeah.
That's great. But Ivan Ilyan's book, Resisting Evil by Force, really, I think like rhetorically and apologetically, we can think of some ways to buy time, for people to find orthodoxy by pushing back, So anyway, that's my current theory anyway.
Well, I like it. I'm pretty happy. What about you, John?
I'm satisfied.
This is a good talk. I had a lot of fun today.
You always say that after every episode.
I know, but I had a lot of fun today.
There's this on social media. There's this kid that eats like these little cookies, and after every bite, he says, "That's my favorite." This is basically Andre after every single episode. Now it's like, "This is my favorite episode." And then
maybe it is.
You're building a library here,
Mr. Keller.
Like this is his,
maybe I'm getting more and more comfortable.
Yeah, well, you're building a good archive. It sounds like. So thanks for having me on. It was a blessing to be here. Yeah,
we're very honored to have you too. Thank you, Father.
Yeah,
and God willing, we have you on again.
Yeah, I'd love to, and maybe we can talk more about Father Theodore next time. Okay. Just kidding.
Or maybe we'll have it in Bucknell and maybe we'll come down.
Yeah, that would be great.
Well, that'd be nice. Get a little traveling studio with us.
Go on the road. You know who you should have also? Paul Kingsnorth from Ireland. You guys might be interested. Does that name ring a bell? Orthodox convert. A friend of Deacon Nicholas here, who we've interviewed. And also kind of, a friend of mine too. Writer, real interesting guy. You can find him online, his YouTube stuff. He's an award-winning novelist, and he converted to Orthodoxy from his most recent exploration before Orthodoxy was Wiccan. So it was quite interesting path. Yeah. So, but
straight from one to the other, from
you
Wiccan
might
to
have to
Orthodox.
Zoom with him. He's zooming into my class on Thursday night. That's not. It's a different class from what we've been talking about. Yeah. So. But anyway, yeah. But there's so many great people in the Orthodox world to talk with. Deacon Nicholas is in touch with a lot of them too, so you can.
This is a new show, so we're all up for talking to literally anyone about literally anything. So
obviously we start off and people notice that it's probably roll court people first, but hopefully we can kind of expand. Go beyond that.
Try not to get too much into the public orthodoxy world. No, sorry, just kidding.
Like, why do you support ecumenism?
Right. Yeah, they've got their own platform, so you guys are given more of a true blue orthodoxy platform in my view. So.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm a little bit too smooth-brained to understand that fully, but we're trying our best. We're trying our best. And if we had a conversation like this at, what is it, like 4 right now? Imagine what we would have if we had a podcast at like 10 p.m.
Wow. Yeah.
That would be definitely a treat, I think, for the audience.
Yeah.
So we look forward to having you back again, Father.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah. Good talking with you both. Yeah.
Glory to God.
Glory to God.